Hello everybody, my name is Peter Bellmann. I'm a PhD student from Ulm University, Germany at the Institute of Neural Information Processing, and I'm going to present to you the paper entitled Experimental Analysis of Bidirectional Pairwise Ordinal Classifier Cascades, which was co-written with Friedhelm Schwenker and our colleagues from the Institute of Medical Systems Biology, Ludwig Lausser and Hans Kestler. This is the overview of the short talk. By capital X, we denote a d-dimensional dataset. By capital omega, we denote the set of class labels. By xij, we denote the set containing all samples from the classes omega I and omega j. By cmij, we denote the classification model that is trained based on the set xij. Note that in this study, we assume symmetric models, which means that cmij is equal to cmji for all I and j. Ordinal classification does not mean that the data features are ordinal scaled. Ordinal classification implies that the classes constitute an ordinal structure, for instance, labeled as small, medium, and large. These are some latest studies on the detection of ordinal class structures, which was not part of our current contribution. In this work, we assume to have prior knowledge of the dataset's unique ordinal class structure. OCC architectures represent divide and conquer techniques, in which each classifier is trained on a binary subtask. An OCC architecture is a sequence of classification models. Each model either provides the architecture's final decision or moves the current input sample to the next classifier in the sequence. The last sequence member always provides the architecture's final decision. Therefore, OCC architectures are so-called selection ensembles, in which a specific classifier subset is selected to provide the ensemble's final decision. In the current work, we focus on so-called pairwise OCC architectures. Note that pairwise OCCs usually outperform the non-pairwise approaches, which is analyzed in the paper Detecting Ordinal Class Structures. In the general pairwise OCC approach, each sequence member is trained in combination with two neighboring classes. Classification model 1 is trained to separate the first class from the second class. Classification model 2 is trained to separate the second class from the third class, and so on. The main motivation for bidirectional OCCs is that the direction of the classifier sequence plays an essential role for the architecture's output distribution. We can start the sequence by one of the two edge classes. Therefore, we differentiate between the current versus next and current versus previous sequences. On the left-hand side, we see the current versus next approach. On the right-hand side, the current versus previous approach. Both approaches consist of the same set of classification models due to the classifier's symmetry. Each of the sequences is defined by its starting edge. The simple idea for the bidirectional architecture is combine both sequences, current versus next and current versus previous. To this end, we include the selector component cmIC1c, which is trained to separate the edge classes. If the current input is more similar to the edge class omega 1, proceed with the current versus next approach. Otherwise, proceed with the current versus previous approach. The study question was, how does this straightforward modification affect the classification performance? Note that we already introduced the bOCC approach based on the publicly available bOCC pain database in combination with support vector machines. In this work, we extend experimental analysis of the proposed architecture with additional datasets, as well as a decision tree classification model. We evaluated our proposed method based on these 5 publicly available ordinal structured datasets, which are all skewed. Note that the first dataset is non-ordinal in the traditional sense. However, we found an ordinal class structure based on our recently proposed definition in the paper Ordinal Classification, Working Definition, and Detection of Ordinal Structures. We used support vector machines with linear kernel and unpruned decision trees as base classifiers. We chose the macro-averaged accuracy and macro-averaged mean absolute error as performance metrics. As evaluation approach, we applied a stratified tenfold cross-validation for each data set. For a statistical analysis, we applied the Wilcoxon test at a significance level of 5%. Based on support vector machines, the proposed bOCC architecture outperforms both one-directional approaches, statistically significant on 3 data sets. The bOCC approach is tied with the current versus previous approach on the CARS dataset and even slightly outperformed by the current versus previous approach on the CRUB dataset. Based on decision trees, the proposed bOCC architecture outperforms both one-directional approaches on all datasets, statistically significant in 9 out of 10 cases. The improvement for the nursery dataset was surprisingly high. This dataset has the special characteristic that the class omega-2 constitutes the minority class to both of its neighboring classes. Here we can see the class-specific mean absolute error values for the nursery dataset. As expected, the current versus next approach performs well specific to the class omega-1. The current versus previous architecture performs well specific to the classes omega-3 and omega-4. The straightforward bidirectional OCC method obviously combines the strengths of both individual architectures, leading to enormous improvements. To briefly summarize the study, first, the direction of OCC architectures plays an important role with respect to the class-specific architecture outputs. Second, the simple addition of the selector component can significantly improve the classification performance, especially datasets in which one class constitutes the minority class to both of its neighboring classes might benefit best from the proposed bidirectional approach. For future analysis, we mainly aim at optimizing the selector component. For instance, one could apply some kind of balancing techniques in case of imbalanced edge classes. It might also be beneficial to include all available classes for the training of the selector component. Finally, we would like to thank the reviewers for the constructive and really helpful feedback provided, which improved our current contribution. Thank you very much for watching this video. Also, please feel free to ask your questions during the corresponding workshop session.